My wife's brother wasn't who I thought, and neither was she. Everyone said I was overreacting. Until I found the photos. You won't believe who my wife's brother turned out to be. I can't believe that I saw this. Hey Reddit, I'd been lurking for years but never thought I'd post. This is one of those stories you wish wasn't real. I'm still trying to wrap my head around what's happening in my life, and if I don't let it out, I'm probably going to explode. So here's the deal. I, 35M, have been married to my wife, Elena, 32F, for just over 7 years. We met when I was working in IT at a medical supply company, and she came in as a new HR manager. She was confident, blunt, and completely out of my league. I was your typical tech dude, mild social anxiety, graphic tees, and a deeply unhealthy relationship with energy drinks. She was the type who wore heels that could kill a man, and somehow still ran in them when it rained. It was one of those whirlwind romances. We went from coworkers to dating to engaged within a year. She was charming, intense, and had this magnetic energy that made everything feel more alive when she was around. She pushed me to get out of my comfort zone and grow the hell up, as she put it. Looking back now, I realize that a lot of that pushing was more like steamrolling, but at the time, I thought it was love. We got married in a small ceremony with just close friends and family. Her family, though, that's where the weirdness started. Or maybe I just ignored it for too long. Elena has one brother, Luca, 34M. They're very close, like weirdly close. When we were still dating, I remember one time walking in on them cuddled up on the couch watching some horror movie. Her head was on his chest, and his arm was wrapped around her waist like they were a couple. I made a joke about them looking like they were auditioning for Alabama, and she got furious. Not annoyed, furious. Said I had a sick mind, and that she and her brother were just affectionate because their parents had been emotionally distant growing up. I apologized and never brought it up again. But honestly, that moment never left me. I just buried it deep and kept moving. Over the years, I saw more little red flags. Luca had a key to our house before my parents did. He'd come over unannounced, and just walk in like he lived there. I once caught him going through our fridge at midnight like it was nothing. When I asked Elena about it, she brushed it off and said, "He's family. You don't tell family to knock." She never had boundaries with him. None. He'd call her at 2 a.m. just to talk, and she'd answer. They'd go out to lunch alone every week. Once, when I tried to join them, she actually got annoyed and said it was their thing. If I ever questioned it, she flipped it back on me, called me insecure or jealous. "What, you're threatened by my brother now?" And because I didn't want to be that guy, I'd back off. But something always felt off. I just never had proof. Then 2 years ago, Luca got divorced. And that's when everything started going downhill. He started showing up even more often. If Elena and I had plans, she'd cancel them if Luca needed her. I remember our anniversary dinner got postponed, twice, because Luca wasn't doing well, and she wanted to cook him dinner. I told her she could still go see him after, or the next day, and she flipped. Said I was being heartless. Said he needed her more. I remember just sitting there in the living room, our candles and takeouts slowly getting cold, while she packed up a full lasagna and left to go see her brother. I wish I could say I left then. But I didn't. I told myself I married a strong woman with a big heart. I told myself this was just temporary. I told myself a lot of things. But deep down, something felt seriously wrong. I just didn't know how bad it actually was yet. Alright, so like I said, things started to shift hard after Luca's divorce. And not in a "he's going through a rough patch" kind of way, but in this intrusive, codependent, borderline emotional entanglement sort of way. Let me just paint you a picture. It was a Saturday morning, maybe 9 a.m. I was still in bed scrolling Reddit, half awake, when I heard the front door unlock. I didn't think much of it at first, figured Elena had gone for a walk and was coming back. But then I heard his voice. Luca. In our house. Just walking in without knocking, without texting. He and Elena started chatting in the kitchen like they were roommates, laughing, the smell of coffee brewing. I got up, threw on a hoodie, and walked out like, "Morning." And this dude, swear to God, was shirtless. Just sweatpants and no shirt. In my kitchen. Drinking my coffee. And Elena? She acted like it was completely normal. She didn't even flinch. I remember standing there like an idiot, watching him pour 2 mugs, one for himself and one for her, before offering me one like I was some third wheel in my own damn home. That moment should have been the breaking point. But again, I didn't say anything. Just bottled it up, logged it mentally under WTF number 238, and moved on. Or tried to. That was around the time I started noticing other stuff. Subtle things that didn't sit right. Like how she stopped calling me, babe, and started calling me, hey. Just, hey. As in, hey, did you grab dog food? Or, hey, Luke is coming over. Her texts became shorter. Drier. But her texts to him? I saw one flash across her screen once. It lit up while she was in the shower. She was texting him while they were in the same house. The message just said, "You looked handsome today, lol. Shave the beard though." Handsome. She called her brother handsome. I actually froze. I stared at that message like my brain couldn't make sense of it. I told myself maybe it was an inside joke, maybe it was a weird sibling thing. Maybe she just meant he looked presentable. But lol? The lol at the end made it worse somehow. I don't know why, but it did. Later that night, I asked her about it. Didn't say I saw the message, I just casually asked, "Hey, do you think Luke is going to start dating again soon?" She just kind of shrugged and said, "He's not ready. He's too hurt. And honestly, women suck. He doesn't need another leech." I don't know why that response got under my skin so bad. Maybe it was the way she said, women, like she wasn't one. Like she was separate from them. Better. Like she was his protector, his savior, the only woman who could ever be enough for him. More red flags kept popping up after that. She started dressing up more, but not for me. I'd catch her doing her makeup or wearing a low-cut top on random Tuesday nights when we weren't going anywhere. I'd say, "You look nice, where you going?" She'd smirk and go, "Nowhere. Just hanging with Luca. We're watching movies." Watching movies. Every week. In our living room. Sometimes with wine. Lights off. No shame. I'm not stupid. I know what that looks like. But still, I didn't have proof. Just gut feelings and passive-aggressive body language and a million little signs that didn't quite add up but still made me feel like I was standing in quicksand. One night, I stayed up late working in my office. Elena thought I'd gone to bed. Around 1 a.m., I went to the kitchen to grab water and saw her phone face up on the counter. Notifications were popping up from Luca. I didn't even mean to snoop, it was just there. I remember the last message said, "I miss how things used to be. Before everything got complicated." And then, "Can we talk tomorrow? I hate pretending." That word, pretending, froze me. Pretending what? I wanted to throw the phone across the room. I wanted to storm into the bedroom and demand answers. But instead, I put the phone down. I drank my water. I sat at the kitchen table for an hour in the dark like a ghost. It's hard to explain the denial you live in when the truth feels too big to hold. I didn't want it to be what I thought it was. I wanted there to be another explanation. Something less horrifying. I mean, come on. It's her brother. That's the one line no one crosses. Right. Right. Okay. So you think that was enough weirdness for one marriage, right? Wrong. Because apparently, the universe wasn't done messing with me yet. I'm going to rewind a bit. After the whole "I hate pretending" message from Luca, things between Elena and me got tense. But not in the way you'd expect. She was suddenly nicer. More affectionate. Not overly romantic or anything, but just calmer. Like she was trying to compensate without saying why. She started making dinner again. She actually initiated sex for the first time in months. She bought me a new gaming headset. Just because. I remember thinking, is this her way of saying sorry? Is she trying to fix something without actually apologizing? It was confusing as hell. Then one evening, I got a call from Elena's mom. Which was already weird. We weren't exactly close. She was one of those wine at noon, passive-aggressive types who always found a way to compliment Elena by subtly insulting me. "Wow, you've actually kept off the weight," was the last thing she said to me before this call. Anyway, she calls and says, "I need to talk to you about something before Elena does." Just like that. No greeting, no small talk. I immediately thought someone died. She goes, "It's about Luca." My stomach dropped. I sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the same chair Luca sat in almost every time he came over. The same one Elena always saved for him. I said, "Okay. What about him?" There was a pause. Then she said, "He's not Elena's full brother." I blinked. "What?" "He's her half-brother. Same dad, different moms." It took me a second to process that. I mean, I'd always assumed they were just siblings. That's what everyone called them. Brother. Sister. It never occurred to me to ask questions. Who does? Apparently, when Elena's dad was still married to her mom, he had an affair with another woman, Luca's mother. The affair lasted years. Eventually, the truth came out, and her parents divorced. Elena was around 9 or 10 at the time. Luca was maybe 8. But here's the kicker. Instead of splitting them apart, the families decided to raise the kids together. Like, they did joint birthday parties, weekend visits, summers, holidays. Her mom and his mom tried to be civil for the kids' sake, and somehow, it all blended into one big dysfunctional Brady Bunch nightmare. According to her mom, Elena and Luca grew up more like best friends than siblings. She said they were inseparable from the start. "Closer than most twins," she said with this weird bitter tone. "Sometimes I felt like I was raising two kids that didn't belong to me." I didn't even know what to say. I just kept nodding and saying, "Uh-huh," like I was taking a customer service survey and not having the foundations of my marriage ripped up and rearranged in real time. When I got off the phone, Elena was in the living room watching TV like nothing was wrong. I stood there for a second, just watching her laugh at some reality show, her feet curled up under a blanket, like she hadn't just been hiding a massive part of her life from me. I finally asked, "Hey, why didn't you ever tell me you and Luca are half-siblings?" She paused the show without looking at me. Then she said, "Does it matter? Does it matter?" That question hit harder than I thought it would. I sat down across from her and said, "Yeah, it matters. It's not about how you're related. It's that you never mentioned it at all. Not once. I've known you for 8 years, Elena." She sighed like I was being dramatic. "We don't go around saying half-sibling all the time. It's not a big deal. We were raised like full siblings, so what difference does it make?" Except it did make a difference. It reframed everything. All those lingering glances. The touching. The long hugs. The wine nights. The "You looked handsome today, LOL." All of it now had a new, ugly lens I didn't know what to do with. I asked her, "Why did your mom call me and tell me? Why now?" She rolled her eyes. "Because she's petty and hates when I keep secrets. She probably thinks it'll cause drama." And then she got mad at me, like I'd betrayed her by finding out. She said I was letting her mother poison my mind, that I was being paranoid and weird. But the thing is, it was already weird. The whole situation had been weird for years. Now it just had a name. And I couldn't stop thinking about that text from Luca again. I miss how things used to be. Before everything got complicated. Complicated how? Before I could spiral deeper, she stood up, kissed the top of my head, and said, "Let's not make this a thing, okay? It's not what you think." But she never actually said what she thought I was thinking. And that silence? It was louder than any lie she could have told. So after the whole, "He's not really my brother" bombshell, things got quiet between us. Not peaceful, just quiet. That kind of tension where you can hear the clock ticking and every clink of a fork at dinner sounds like a gun's handsome. She acted like it was no big deal. Like this was just one of those fun family trivia facts you toss out at parties. But for me, it felt like my brain had been rewired. I started replaying everything in my head. Every overly long hug. Every private joke. Every time she dropped plans with me to run to him. All of it, now soaked in this fog of uncertainty. And her reaction, God, her reaction. No real explanation. No apology. Just, let's not make this a thing. Except she already had. A couple nights later, I walked in on her on the phone with Luca. She didn't hear me come in. She was in our bedroom, sitting cross-legged on the bed, whispering like she was in high school. I only caught a few words. I know. It's just hard now. He's asking too many questions. I feel like I'm walking a tightrope. Then silence. Then she said, "No, you calm down." That was it. That was all I needed to hear to know that whatever was going on between them, it wasn't just some childhood closeness thing anymore. That line? "He's asking too many questions?" Yeah, that hit like a train. Because who says that, unless there's something to hide? I didn't confront her that night. I just stood in the hallway like a damn ghost, listening to the woman I married try to control a fire I hadn't even fully seen yet. But I could feel the smoke creeping under the door. All right. So here's where I stopped pretending I was just overthinking everything and finally decided to act. The night after I overheard Elena on the phone whispering about me, asking too many questions, I barely slept. I just laid there staring at the ceiling like it had answers. She was curled up beside me like nothing was wrong, like we weren't living two completely different realities. And it hit me, I don't know this woman. Not really. I know the version she wanted me to know. The curated, controlled, confident Elena. But not the one who keeps half-brother secrets. Not the one who lies by omission and gets weirdly defensive when I'm just trying to understand the family I supposedly married into. So the next day, while she was at work, I did something I never thought I'd do. I went through her phone. Look, judge me if you want, I don't care. I'd never done it before. I'm not the snooping type. But I felt like I was living with a stranger. And strangers don't get blind trust anymore. And sure enough, buried in a locked folder in her Fansomio gallery were a bunch of screenshots. Mostly memes, jokes, random crap. But one caught my eye. It was a blurry selfie of her and Luca, in bed. Fully clothed, but the positioning? It wasn't sibling Y. He was behind her, and their bodies too familiar for siblings. Her shirt was riding up, and his arm was tucked under her like they were together. And the caption? It was from her. A saved Instagram story screens handsome. "This is my comfort zone." My stomach turned. I put the phone down like it burned. I sat there in the quiet with this buzzing in my ears, like reality had finally snapped. But I still didn't have proof, right? Just implications. Just heavy suggestions. The kind that make your heart pound even if your brain's still trying to play dumb. And because I'm an idiot, or maybe because I wanted her to confirm it, I confronted her that night. I didn't scream. I didn't accuse. I just asked calmly, "Is there something you need to tell me about you and Luca?" Her face changed instantly. Not confused. Not surprised. Terrified. Then came the classic moves, arms crossed, defensive posture, the heavy sigh. "Why would you even ask me something like that?" "Because you're hiding things. Because you whisper on the phone when you think I'm asleep. Because you call your half-brother handsome. Because you have saved screenshots of you and him cuddled up like boyfriend and girlfriend. Because nothing about this is normal." But I didn't say all that. I just looked at her and said, "I saw the Fansomio. The one in bed." She froze. For a good few seconds. Just stood there like a mannequin before her face cracked into this weird, crooked smile. Then she said the most insane thing I've ever heard. "It's not what it looks like." "Oh, come on. That's the line? That's what you're going with?" At this point, I was shaking. I couldn't tell if it was from rage or heartbreak or both. I said, "Okay, then explain it. Tell me exactly what it is." And all she said was, "He was having a bad night. We were just comforting each other. We fell asleep. It's not a big deal." I laughed. I actually laughed because it was either that or flip the kitchen table. This is my comfort zone. Was just comforting each other? And that's when she snapped. Loud. Angry. Red-faced. "You're obsessed with him. You keep inventing these narratives in your head. You're so insecure it's pathetic." She screamed that. In my face. Like I was the one losing it. Like I was the one crossing lines. I walked out. I had to. I grabbed my keys and drove around for 2 hours just to cool off, just to keep myself from doing or saying something I'd regret. But the worst part. As I drove aimlessly around town, one thought kept echoing in my head. This is my comfort zone. What the hell did that even mean? When I got home that night, the house was dark. Elena had gone to bed, or at least pretended to. Her side of the bed was perfectly made, like she'd sat there waiting for me, then changed her mind and left the room. I didn't bother checking where she went. I slept on the couch with the TV on low volume, something mindless to drown out the thoughts. But thoughts don't drown easy when you're trying not to look at the truth. The next few days were strained. We barely spoke. She acted like nothing was wrong, like I had just had a weird episode. And now we were back to normal. But nothing felt normal. Not the way she walked past me like I wasn't there. Not the fact that she kept her phone surgically attached to her at all times. Not the locked office door upstairs that she started spending a lot more time behind. I couldn't shake it. That fansomio. That caption. Her reaction. The way she twisted it around and made me feel like the crazy one for asking obvious questions. I started walking around the house like it was a crime scene. Everything felt suspicious. The coffee mug Luca used was still in the drying rack. One of his hoodies was hanging on the coat hook in the entryway. He hadn't even been by recently, or at least not that I knew of. I started questioning everything. Every memory. Every time they hugged too long. Every inside joke I wasn't part of. Every time she blew off date night to see him. It was like someone handed me a puzzle I thought I'd already finished and said, "Actually, half of this picture is wrong." It got worse when I found a journal in the back of her closet. I wasn't snooping this time. I was looking for a charger I'd left in there after a trip. But there it was, buried under some scarves in a shoebox, a black leather notebook. Elena doesn't journal. Or at least, she said she didn't. The entries were sporadic. Most were years old. Some were just scribbles and rants about work, but one stuck with me. It was from just a few months before Luca's divorce. I wish I could just disappear with him. Start over somewhere. Not be ashamed of how I feel. He understands me like no one else ever has, not even my husband. I read that line 3 times. I could barely breathe. She didn't name him, but she didn't have to. There was no one else it could be about. Not her coworkers, not a friend, not some mystery man. Just him. Always him. That's when it hit me, she never talked about us like that. Never. She's never been the romantic type, sure, but that kind of vulnerability? That raw longing? I never got that from her. It was like I'd spent years being the placeholder in my own marriage. I didn't even bring it up right away. I put the journal back. I wasn't ready to hear her spin more lies or tell me I was reading too much into things. Again. I needed to get my own head straight first. So I called her cousin Mia. Mia and I had always gotten along. She was blunt, didn't play games, and she liked me, which honestly made her rare in Elena's orbit. I told her I needed to ask her something, off the record, just between us. She hesitated but agreed. I didn't even beat around the bush. I just said it. Was there ever, Anything going on between Elena and Luca? Like more than what siblings normally act like? There was silence on the other end. And that silence said more than anything. When Mia finally spoke, her voice was low and measured. I don't know what exactly happened between them, but, yeah. It's always been weird. We all saw it. They shared a bond that made others uncomfortable. It used to make my mom uncomfortable. At family parties, they'd disappear for hours. Alone. Always said they were just talking, but you know. No. I didn't know. I didn't want to know. I think most of us just decided not to ask questions. She added. Because what do you even do with that information? That was the moment it all truly crumbled for me. I realized this wasn't just a recent emotional affair. This wasn't just a close sibling dynamic that got a little messy after a divorce. This was decades deep. This was rot in the foundation. I was never her partner. I was a prop. A cover. Someone to share a mortgage with while she kept this other, secret world going behind the scenes. She gave me just enough love to keep me from leaving. Just enough attention to make me think I mattered. Meanwhile, her whole emotional loyalty belonged to someone else, someone she shouldn't have even had that kind of relationship with in the first place. And I'd been living in that house. Sleeping next to her. Making her coffee. Kissing her goodbye in the morning. Like an idiot. Like a man who had no idea the floor beneath him had already caved in. The day it all came crashing down wasn't dramatic, not at first. It was a Tuesday. Just a bland, forgettable Tuesday. I'd worked late, picked up some takeout, and came home to find Elena sitting at the dining table with a glass of red wine and a look that said she'd been waiting for me. She didn't even glance at the food in my hand. Just stared at me like I'd already disappointed her somehow. I want to talk, she said. My stomach dropped. I put the bags down without saying a word and sat across from her, the weight of that journal entry, that fansomio, Mia's voice, all of it hanging over me like a storm cloud ready to explode. She took a sip of her wine, set it down, and folded her hands in front of her like this was a business meeting. You've been acting cold, she said. I laughed, short and bitter. Cold? Cold was generous. I'd been full-on emotionally frozen, but sure, let's pretend that I was the one being distant. You've been distant, she continued. Secretive. Accusing me of things without actually saying them out loud. I stayed quiet. Then she dropped her gaze to her hands and said it. I know what you saw. Silence. She didn't say what exactly. Just, I know what you saw. She didn't specify the fansomio. Or the journal. Or the text messages. Which one? All of them? My pulse kicked up in my throat. So, are you going to explain? She looked up at me. Her eyes were glassy, but there were no tears. Just this cold detachment, like she was reliving something in her head and trying to stay numb through it. And then she said it. Our relationship changed after everything we went through. It took me a few seconds to process those words. I just stared at her, heart hammering in my chest like it was trying to escape. I mean, yes, she said quickly. We're technically siblings. Half. But we didn't grow up like that. We didn't feel like that. It was different. She paused, like she was waiting for me to respond. I didn't. I couldn't. I never planned it. It just happened. We were always close, but after his divorce. She trailed off, shaking her head. I don't even know how to explain it. We let boundaries blur. There it was. Just like that. No build-up. No excuses. No sobbing confessions. Just 3 words that detonated everything. We let boundaries blur. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. The walls of the room seemed to shift around me. Everything was too loud and too quiet all at once. I didn't ask what line. I didn't need to. My gut already knew. She said she didn't want it. That she tried to stop it. That it only happened once. All the usual lies. But you don't hide someone's toothbrush in your drawer if it only happened once. You don't text about pretending or write about wishing you could disappear together if it was a one-time slip. She never said the word. Never said slept with. Never said affair. But the way she looked at me, that dead-eyed, resigned stare, told me everything. She knew it was over. But what broke me wasn't just the cheating. It wasn't even that it was with her half-brother. It was that when she finished speaking, she didn't apologize. Not once. She just sat there. Waiting. I asked her finally, "Why didn't you just leave me?" She flinched. "I didn't want to. But you didn't want me either." Silence. I stood up and walked out of the room. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't shout. I didn't slam a door. I just walked outside and sat on the porch for hours, watching the sky darken like it was trying to swallow me whole. I was numb. Hollowed out. Everything I'd built my adult life around, this marriage, this woman, this home, it was all rotting from the inside out. And I had no idea what to do next. You'd think after a revelation like that, after your wife admits she crossed the most disgusting line imaginable, there'd be a firestorm. Screaming. Accusations. Shattered glasses. Police reports. Something. But no. There was none of that. The morning after her confession, Elena acted like everything was normal. She made coffee. She hummed while brushing her hair. She even asked if I wanted eggs. Like she hadn't dropped a nuclear bomb on our marriage just 10 hours before. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just sat at the kitchen counter, numb, eyes locked on the steam rising from my untouched mug. I felt like a ghost in my own home, watching a stranger live a life that used to belong to me. That day, I called in sick to work. I told them I had food poisoning, but really, I just sat in my car parked outside a grocery store for 3 hours. Didn't go inside. Didn't listen to music. Just stared at the steering wheel trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do now. And that's when I decided to go looking for answers, not just what happened, but how long it had been happening. Because the truth is, when someone finally admits to crossing a line like that, you start to realize just how many lines they've already stepped over, danced around, and buried. I started with her laptop. She rarely used it, mostly worked off her phone, but I knew she had a sync drive account she never logged out of. And what I found? It wasn't pornographic. It wasn't even overtly romantic. It was worse, it was intimate. Dozens of fansomios over the years, some taken on vacations I wasn't even on. Her and Luca at the lake. At a cabin. Sitting on a swing set at midnight. His arm around her in every single one. Her head on his shoulder. Foreheads touching in a few. Birthday dinners I thought she was spending with coworkers. There were also letters. Not emails. Not texts. Literal letters, scanned and saved, some typed, some handwritten. Some from when they were teenagers. One stood out. Dated 6 years ago, a year after we got married. I know we're not supposed to feel this way. I know it's wrong. But being near you is the only time I feel whole. You see me in a way no one else ever has. I can't explain it, and I don't want to anymore. I just want to stay here, in this secret, as long as we can. That line wrecked me. In this secret. Like their whole relationship was some sacred, forbidden temple where I was just the doormat outside. I couldn't read any more after that. I slammed the laptop shut and nearly threw up in the sink. I had been living in a lie for years. Not months. Years. It made me sick to realize that every moment I had treasured, our anniversary trips, the nights we made love, the holidays with our families, she had him living in the corners of it all. Watching me stumble through a marriage I thought was real, while they clung to each other behind my back. And then came the worst part. I called her sister. I didn't even plan to. I was just scrolling through my contacts trying to figure out who I could talk to without breaking down, and there she was. And before I could talk myself out of it, I hit call. She picked up after 2 rings. And before I could even get the words out, she sighed and said, "You know, don't you? That's when everything really fell apart. Her sister knew. So did their aunt. So did a few cousins. No one knew the full details, apparently, but everyone had suspicions. Everyone noticed how they acted around each other, how Elena changed after I proposed, how Luca would always get weirdly possessive when she started dating someone seriously. They all suspected, and not a single one of them said a word to me. Her sister told me she even confronted Elena once years ago, asked her straight up if something happened between them. Elena denied it, of course, and spun it as just being really close because of their traumatic childhood. And like cowards, they all accepted that. They all decided to look away. Because if they looked too closely, they'd have to do something about it. And no one wanted to deal with the fallout. But now it was my fallout. My home. My life. My marriage. Burning to ash in front of me. I wish I could say I stormed into his house like a man on fire. That I punched him in the face, or screamed until the whole neighborhood knew what kind of freak he really was. But when I finally confronted Luca, I was calm. Too calm. It was a couple of days after I spoke to Elena's sister. I hadn't said a single word to Elena in that time. We existed like roommates who hated each other. She must have known it was coming, the silence, the way I looked at her like she was a stranger. Maybe part of her wanted me to confront him, to drag it into the light so she wouldn't have to. I texted Luca and said I needed to talk. No context. He just replied with, "Sure. Come by whenever." So I did. I pulled into his driveway and sat there for a few minutes, staring at the door. It was the same house we'd helped him move into after the divorce. I remembered carrying boxes labeled kitchen and books while Elena carried clothes and bathroom, laughing the whole time. I walked up and knocked. He opened the door like he'd been waiting. Smiling. That smug, fake humble smile that made me want to shove him through a wall. "Hey man," he said. "You alright?" I walked in without answering, without looking at him. Just stood in the middle of the living room where it all must have happened. Where they had their moments. Where they crossed the line. "You and Elena," I said. "How long has it been going on?" He froze. Smile gone. His jaw twitched, and for the first time, I saw it, that flash of guilt. Fear. Not surprise. He knew. "Man, I don't think." Answer. The question. He didn't sit. He didn't pace. He just stood there and rubbed the back of his neck like a teenager caught sneaking out past curfew. Finally, he said it. Years. Years. No denial. No excuse. Just one word that broke every remaining piece of me that Elena hadn't already destroyed. "I loved her before you," he added. "Before you even knew her. You think she was yours? She was never yours." I can't remember everything I said after that. There was yelling. A chair might have hit the wall. I didn't touch him, barely stopped myself. But I made it clear, he wasn't a secret anymore. I told him I'd be filing for divorce. That his family would know. That the world would know. He didn't fight it. Didn't try to convince me otherwise. He just nodded like I was a predictable plot twist in a story he'd already read 1,000 times. I walked out of that house shaking, nauseous, hollow. But free. I left Elena the next day. I packed everything I needed while she sat silently on the couch, watching some cooking show like our marriage wasn't being gutted 5 feet away from her. She didn't cry. Didn't beg. Didn't apologize. Just asked, "Where will you go?" "Anywhere you aren't," I said. She nodded. The divorce was swift. Clean. She didn't fight me on it. No property battles. No arguments over the dog. She didn't want him, anyway. I stayed with a buddy for a while, then found a small apartment with a view of nothing but the freeway. But it was mine. Quiet. Honest. No secrets in the walls. I blocked her number. Blocked his, too. I heard they moved in together a few months later, Elena and Luca. Half-siblings. Emotionally involved. Whatever the hell they are now. I try not to think about it. Sometimes I still do. Sometimes I still see them in my sleep, whispering in a language I never understood, touching each other like they'd been born to ruin people. I went to therapy. Told the whole story once, front to back, then sat in silence while the therapist just blinked. Said it was one of the darkest things she'd ever heard. That made me feel strangely proud. Like surviving it made me a different breed of human. It's been a year now. I'm dating again. Slowly. Cautiously. I don't flinch when someone hugs their sibling anymore, but I still watch their hands. I still look for signs I didn't know how to spot back then. And what did I learn? Trust your gut. If something feels off, it probably is. If someone makes you feel crazy for asking questions, they're hiding something. And if your wife calls her brother handsome, run. No one wants to believe their life can become a horror story. But mine did. And now that it's over, I'm just glad I made it out alive.